Hey, what's going on, guys? So I've been getting a lot of requests for a CSS Grid tutorial. So in this video we're going to cover all the basics of the new CSS Grid layout feature, which allows us to create two-dimensional layouts on a web page and align items in both columns and rows. All browsers now support the grid layout as of March of 2017, so let's go ahead and dive in and take a look at CSS Grids. This video is sponsored by Dev Mountain. If you're interested in learning web development, iOS, or UX design, Dev Mountain is a 12-week design and development bootcamp intended to get you a full-time job in the industry. To learn more, visit devmountain.com or click the link in the description below. Alright, so a lot of people are asking what the difference is between Flexbox and Grid, and I'm not going to go through the specifics of this. I don't even have enough information to do a full comparison. I will do some research and create a video on it, but basically Flexbox is for one-dimensional layouts in columns or rows, and the Grid is for two-dimensional layouts for columns and rows. So I think that this is a really nice visual representation of the difference. So one dimension versus two dimensions. So with Flexbox, we basically have some columns and they're aligned in a row. Okay, with CSS Grid, we have some columns and rows, and you can see that this column here actually has some rows on the side of it. Okay, so it's aligned with multiple rows, and it just gives you a two-dimensional effect. Now, you can achieve this kind of layout with Flexbox, but it's done in a much different way. You'll have multiple flex items with all kinds of alignments and so on. But with CSS Grids, this is all one grid. Okay, you can do this just by having one grid. And I'm not going to go too much further into it than that. But just know that Flexbox is a one-dimensional layout. CSS Grids is a two-dimensional layout. Alright, so let's jump in here. Now I'm using the Atom text editor, and I'm using a plugin called Atom Live Server, which just allows me to run the file on my local host over here. And what I have is a folder called CSS Grid with an index.html file with just some very basic markup in it to get us started. Okay, I'm also using an Atom plugin called Emmet, which allows me to do shortcuts to quickly create, div tags and other HTML elements. So you may see me use that along the way. Now, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to start off very simple, and we're going to create a layout with a main column and a sidebar. So that's something that's very simple, also very common that you see on websites and applications. So what I'll do is in the body here, we're going to create a wrapper class. Okay, now you don't have to call it wrapper, you can call it whatever you want. In fact, a lot of people will call it a grid because it is a grid container or whatever you want to call it. So inside this wrapper, we're going to have two divs, one for the main layout, one for the sidebar. So let's go ahead and create a div. And I'm going to put some text in here. Now Atom allows me to do lorem, let's say lorem 80 tab, and that'll give us 80 words of dummy text. Okay, so I'm going to create the second div. And in here, I'm going to say lorem, let's do lorem 30 tab. Okay, so this is our main column and our sidebar. So let's save that. And obviously, it's just going to look, it's not going to have any alignments or anything to begin with. Now, before we get into the grid, I'm just going to add a couple styles up here so that you can better see the outline of each column. So let's take that wrapper class, and we're going to say all the divs, all the direct divs in that wrapper. I'm just going to give a background of light gray, and I'm just going to give it a padding of 1em. Okay, so that better defines the columns. Now I'm also going to make it so that every other element or every other div in the wrapper has a different shade of gray. Okay, so to do that, we're going to say wrapper. Okay, the divs in the wrapper, and we want to grab the nth child odd, so it's going to say every other one, every odd element, and then I'm going to just give the background, we'll say DDD. Alright, so now every other element is going to have a different shade of gray. So again, this has nothing to do with grids, it's just so you can better see things. So now we're going to start to work with the grid. So let's take our wrapper class, and we're going to add a display grid. Okay, just like with Flexbox you would do display flex, we're going to do display grid and save. Now notice that we don't have any changes yet. It's not going to do anything different. because we need to define the width of our columns, okay, or of the div elements. So to do that, we use grid-template-columns. All right, and let's say we want a 70% column and a 30% column, and save. And that's it. That's going to give us our main div and then our sidebar div. Now, since this is a grid, no matter how many divs we have in our wrapper, it's going to continue to follow this map, this 70%, 30%. So just to give you an example, let's copy both of these divs, and let's go ahead and paste another set in. Okay, so now we have the 4 divs. Let's save, and it's going to follow that 70%, 30% no matter what. Okay, we don't have to define rows, okay, like in Flexbox or Bootstrap or whatever, where we define, well, I guess not with Flexbox, but in a grid system like Bootstrap, we define our rows. Now, we can change this to, let's say, let's do 40%, 30%, 30%, and save. And that's going to split it into 3 columns, so 40%, 30%, 30. And it's going to follow that. Even though we have 4 divs and we only set 3 values here, it's going to continue to follow that. That's why this one here is 40. If I go and I add another div down at the bottom here, and we'll just say hello and save, it's going to follow that formula. Okay, so it's going to be 30, the next one will be 30, the next one will be 40 down here, and it's going to follow that system. All right, let me just get rid of that one. And let's just change this back to 70-30. Whoop. All right, so we have our 70-30 grid. Now, if we want to have, let's say, some spacing in between here, we don't have to manually set margin. We can add something called gap. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll say grid-column-gap, and let's set that to 1em. You can use whatever unit you want. You can use pixels, and save it, and you'll see that now we have a space here. Now, this is the column gap, so it's separating the columns. If you want to separate it this way, then that's a row. So we would say grid-row-gap and set that to 1em. Okay, so now we have that spacing. Now, if you're going to use the same spacing here, which you probably often will, you can actually cancel this out, and you can just do grid gap. Okay, we'll do grid gap 1em, and then what I'll do is just comment these out. I'm going to keep them there so that you guys have them, and save, and you'll see it gives us the same effect. All right, so this is very, very basic. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another file. I'm just going to call it index2.html. Okay, because we're going to create a couple files. I want you guys to have this as a reference, and I don't want to change it up too much. So I'm going to just create another file. Okay, so let's go ahead and put some structure in here. Just get rid of this stuff. We don't need that. And we'll say CSS Grid. And we'll put our style tags in here. All right, so what I'm going to do now is let's create a wrapper. So we'll say wrapper. And these are going to be, we're not going to put as much content. So let's put a div, and let's just say lorem 4. Okay, so just a couple words, and then I'm just going to copy that, and we'll paste a bunch in. Okay, and then I'm going to grab from index.html this stuff just so you can see, again, so we can add the background and stuff. Okay, and then let's go to /index2.html. Let's see, did I save that? There we go. All right, so we haven't done anything with the grid yet. So let's go up here and let's say wrapper, and let's do display grid, and then again we're going to do our template columns. So we want to do grid template columns, and now instead of doing percents, there's actually a different unit we can use, and that's fractions. So let's say we want to do 1fr, 1fr, 1fr. Okay, and then we'll save that, and that's going to split it into fractions. So since we have 3 of these, it's going to be 3 columns. Now if we wanted, for instance, this middle one to be bigger than these other two, what we could do is we could say 2FR, save it, and now you can see that one's bigger. Now it's recommended to use the FR over percentages or pixels. Again, you can use, I don't know if I said this, but you can also use pixels here, or any unit. But the fractional, I think it's called, is the recommended, because when you start to use percentages, you're going to run into issues with margin and padding, especially when you get into nesting and so on. So you want to stick to these fractionals. Now, if we were to have all, 3 1FRs, we can actually create a shorter syntax for this. Especially, imagine if we had 12 of these. So what we could do is, let's take our grid template columns, and instead of putting 3 separate ones, we can actually say repeat, and then in here we can say let's repeat 3 times 1FR. Save that, and there we go. If we wanted to do 4 FRs, so 4 columns, we could do that as well. Now we don't have to just do 1 FR here. Let's say we wanted a combination of 1 and 2, so 1 2 1 2. Then we could do 1 FR 2 FR, and we'll say repeat that, and now it's 1 2 1 2 1 2, and it'll keep going like that 4 times. All right, but let's just keep it at 1 FR. We'll do 3 columns like that. Now we can add our gap if we want. So let's say grid gap, we'll say 1M. Okay, that's going to separate them out. So now let's talk about height. So by default, if we were to, actually, first let's just deal with fixed heights. So to do that, let's do grid dash auto dash rows, and we're going to set this to, let's say, 100 pixels. Save, and now they're all going to be 100 pixels high, okay, which is really helpful. When you're dealing with regular CSS and you want to deal with alignments and heights, and it can get a little messy. Okay, so this really makes it simple. Now if I were to add more content to one of these, let's take this second one here, and let's say lorem 40 tab, and save. You'll see that it's going to go outside of it. This is going to stick it at 100 pixels no matter what. Now if we want to make this flexible, what we can do is, let's see, I'm going to comment this out because I want you guys to have, if I don't want to be changing everything, I want you guys to have, the incremental changes in these files. So let's say grid auto rows, and what we can do is we can set min max. All right, and we're going to say we want these to be 100 pixels and auto. So this is going to, if I save it, it's actually going to stretch out to fill the content. It's going to be 100 pixels by default, but if our content goes beyond that 100 pixels, then it's going to follow it. Okay, it's going to stretch basically, and it's only going to be for this particular row. These ones you can see are going to stay at 100. Now if this one here happened to fall up here, like if I said repeat 4 and save, that one is now going to stretch because it's on the same row as that. Okay, but I'm going to put that back to 3. Okay, so just remember, if you want your height to be flexible, then and you want it to have an initial 100 pixels or whatever it may be, then you want to use this min max function. All right, so now let's talk about nesting grids or subgrids. So we're going to go to, let's see, we'll go to the third one here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this particular div a class of nested. Okay, and then we'll put a div in here, and we'll just say lorem. We'll make it really short. Okay, and then let's just copy that, and we'll do 3 of these. So let's save that. By default, it's just going to look like this, obviously. But what we need to do is set this nested to be a grid. So let's go up here, and let's see, we'll go right here, I guess, and say nested, and we're going to display as a grid. Okay, if I save it, you'll see that it spreads out. Now I want these to go, I want 3 in a row. So what we'll do is do our grid template columns, and I'm actually going to copy that because we want 3 So save that. There we go. Let's make it so that we can see these a little better. So what I'm going to do is, let's see, I'll go down here and I'll say nested, all the direct divs in nested. I just want to add a border. Let's do border 333, 1 pixel solid. Okay. And then we can also set a height for these nested divs. So if we want to do that, we're going to use grid auto rows. So let's go to nested and do grid auto rows. And let's set that to, let's say 70 pixels and save. And there we go. We can also add a gap. So let's say grid gap and we'll do 1M, save. There we go. Let's see, let's also add some padding to the inner divs of the nested. So we'll say padding 1M. There we go. So it's gonna, you see that everything is going to adjust to accommodate that style. All right, and no matter how many divs I put in this nested, let's go ahead and just paste in some more. There we go. So you'll see that they'll just automatically look correct. They're going to generate as an actual grid. All right, so I hope that I'm being clear in this tutorial. I'm actually pretty new to CSS Grid, as are most people. All right, so I'm going to keep this for you guys as a reference, and I'm going to create one more file. We're going to look at a couple more things. So let's say index3.html, and let's see, we're going to just, you know what I'll do is just copy everything we did. We'll just copy index2. And then I'm just going to get rid of, let's see, get rid of the nested stuff. And let's see, we'll just, let's just get rid of all this. And we'll get rid of everything that's in the wrapper. Okay, so we just have a div with the class of wrapper. We have our background crap here, and the wrapper is displayed as a grid. So let's save that and go to index3.html. Okay, so we don't have any content in here yet. Now what I'm going to do is just create a couple divs in here. We're going to create some divs, and I'm going to give them a class of box, not blocks, box. All right, so we'll go ahead and actually in here I'll say box 1. Let's copy that. 2, 3, 4. So we'll do 4 boxes. 4, 4, 4. And I'm also going to give them individual classes. That'll be box 1, box 2, box 3, and box 4. Okay, so there we go. And let's go up to our wrapper, to our grid. And let's say grid template columns, and we'll set that to, let's do one, we'll do 1 FR, 2 FR, 1 FR. So it's going to be 3 columns to save it. So it's going to be, you know, 1, 2 fraction, 1 fraction. And for the height, for the auto rows, let's set that to min-max. We'll set it to min-max 100 pixels by default, but we want it to stretch to fit any content inside of it. We'll also add our gap. So grid gap 1M and save. So now we're going to look at justifying and aligning items. Okay, so in this wrapper, let's say justify items, and we're going to set that to start, and we're going to save. So this is going to align it this way, and it's going to put the element at the start of its column. Okay, and if you know Flexbox, this is pretty similar. We have our flex justify and alignments there as well, and we use start and end and center. But this is going to align the items to the start, all of them. Let's try center. Okay, that's going to put them in the center. Let's do end, and that'll put them at the end. and then the default is stretch. Okay, so stretch is just gonna, stretch it across the whole thing. So we also have align items, which is going to go the other way. So if we set this to start, you'll see they're going to start at the top here. We can do center, put them in the center, and we can do end. Okay, and then the default again is stretch. So we can use justify items and align items. Now we can also do align self. So if we go down here, let's create some classes for box 1 through 4. We'll go right here and let's say box 1. Yeah, we'll just do box 1, box 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so let's take box 1 and let's give it an align self of start. Okay, save that, and you'll see it's going to align it to the top, to the start. So let's take box 2 and we'll say align, let's say align self end, and that'll put it to the end. Okay, we can also do justify self. So let's take box 3 and say justify self, and we'll say end. Save that, and it puts it to the end. Okay, so you can align things however you want. You can either do all items with justify items, align items, or you can do just individual elements here with align self and justify self. All right, so the last concept that I want to talk about is one that's a little confusing. It was a little confusing to me at first. It still kind of is, but it is using lines. So I'm going to bring down an image here, which, if I can get this freaking thing in here, what the hell? There we go. All right, so think of this is a grid here. Okay, so we have three rows, and think of these lines as 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, same thing going down, 1, 2, 3. Now, what we want to do is we can take, for instance, box 1, and we can say we want it to go from 1 to 3 this way, or from 1 to 3 this way. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just comment out the align selves, because I don't want that to confuse you guys. I probably should have did that after, but let's just go ahead and comment these out. Okay, and then let's take box 1, and the properties for this is going to be grid column and grid row. So let's say grid column, and let's say we want from 1 to 3. We want it to span from 1 to 3. Actually, before I do that, let's just save it back to what it looks like naturally. And then, yeah, all right. And then we'll put back grid column 1 to 3, and let's save. So just like if we look at this diagram, we're saying take it from here to here. So 1 to 3. And it's going to knock these ones over. And then at the same time, we can go this way. We can go vertical. Let's say we want it to go from 1 to 3 that way as well. So for that, we would use grid dash row, and we'll say 1, 3, and save. Okay, and that pushes it down. And notice that now we have these over here. This is what is meant by two-dimensional. This is what is much different than Flexbox. And it can get a little complicated understanding the placement, at least in my opinion, but it is really powerful. And once you're done with this, you may want to, if you're really interested in CSS grids, I'd suggest looking at some more advanced concepts. So let's now take box 2. Oh, you know what? They all say box 4. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so now we have box 2 right here, and what we'll do is we'll say grid. Let's do grid column. Set that to 3. It doesn't have to be a span. We'll just set it to 3, so it stays where it is. And then let's set the row from 1 to 3. Okay, remember row is this way, so we'll go 1 to 3. So as you can probably guess, it's going to just go. It's going to take up that whole area. So let's say grid grid row 1 to 3, and there we go. So now it's going to take up 1 to 3 this way. Now we can order these in different ways too by using this method. So let's take box 3 and let's say we want grid column, and let's say we want 2 to 4, and then we'll say grid row, and grid row will keep at 3. So let's save that, and now you'll see that box 3 has moved over because we're saying start at 2 and go to 4. So it's starting at 2, going to 4, and it's pushing box 4 over to this side. So we can rearrange the grid however we want. All right, now another awesome thing about grids that you don't really get with Flexbox is you can overlap things. You can overlap elements. So let's take this box 4 here, and let's say we want grid column 1. Okay, grid column 1. And then for the row, we'll say grid row. We're going to say 2 to 4. Let's save that. And now you'll see that for the grid column, of course, it's starting at 1 over here. But for the row, we're starting at 2. So going this way, starting at 2, going down to 4. All right, and this makes it overlap box 1. And if you wanted to more clearly see this, we could simply add a border. We'll say 1 pixel solid and save, and you'll see that it's overlapping box 1. So we can do things like this without, traditionally having to add margin negatives and things like that, which is crap. All right, and even using all of these lines, these line spans, we can still use our alignments. So let me just uncomment this stuff. Oops. And we'll go ahead and save, and you'll see it's still going to align things. So there's a lot you can do. There's a lot more than this. Like I said, I'm fairly new to CSS grids, but I can already see how powerful they can be when building interfaces, especially the grid type interfaces like Microsoft uses a lot with the hell is it called? The Metro or whatever, like the Windows screen, this stuff here. So if you want stuff like this in your UI, like this is really powerful for that. Okay, I'm just gonna comment that stuff back, the alignments back out before I save this file for you guys. Okay, all this code will be in the description. So I think that's gonna be it, guys. Like I said, if you want to look more into this, look at some of the advanced stuff. This is the basics of CSS grids. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Please leave a like if you did. Please subscribe if you're not. And that's it. Thanks for watching. So if you guys really like my videos and you learn a lot from them and maybe you have a couple extra dollars to spare, check out my Patreon page. I'm working on creating special content for patrons. You also get special deals on future courses, and there's even an email support tier for all YouTube videos and projects. To learn more, visit patreon.com/TraversyMedia.